I don't have to win. We both just have to lose.
Antman and Wasp Quantumania, that's a title, it's gotten like mixed reviews, polarizing reviews between critics and audience. And really, it's because I think it's an amalgamation between The Wizard of Oz and Avatar. There's a lot of setup and things get put where they need to be put and goes in the right direction, but there's no emotional value that gets held onto it. Marvel was always at its best with its standalone films, whenever a character could just thrive in their own world. But in Ant-Man and Wasp Quantumania, this gets kind of taken away because the movie feels like it's a big setup for Kang, the next big baddie of the series. Don't get me wrong, it ends up working, probably a little too well. Kang is the best part of the movie, and he captures everything and everyone. It's just, for the first whole 2 acts, we're kind of just spent hyping him up. And because of this, it takes away from everyone else's. There's character progressions that just doesn't feel like it exists at all or is slightly there. And this movie really is for Scott Lang, but because it's split up between a lot of people, you don't really feel his growth. To put in perspective, really the first 2 acts come to just our characters landing in this unknown world. They're being told that other people that came the same way that they did treated them poorly and that they're scared of them. And our heroes must unite the natives in order to get them to go up against the one outsider that has been oppressing them this whole time. Sound familiar? Now, I'm going to go into spoilers here, so you've been warned. The movie starts out like the trailer. Everything's going really well for Scott. Honestly, probably too well. Everyone's kind of figured out all their issues and dramas in the past 2 films. There's no daddy issues. There's no grudges. There's no will they, won't they. Everyone's happy. Everyone's kind of living their life and they're content with all that's going on. So much so that whenever we start out pulling Cassie out of jail in the first act, and the rest of the family is super understanding and supportive. There's nothing wrong with it at all. Scott's the only one that has the problem with it. So early on, there's really no drama or conflict with Cassie that needs to be addressed, other than the fact that Scott doesn't want her to live this type of life. Now, we quickly get sucked into the quantum realm. Is this one of my Dungeons and Dragons scripts? And we learn that Janet has something to offer here, but she takes notes out of the Hold'em maneuver and decides not to tell anyone.
Nothing. Tell us that we have a plan.
Now, she has many opportunities to do so, where they're walking miles for hours at end and they're like, hey, should we talk about, what's going on here and what you're hiding from us? And she just flat out says no. At the same time that Hank, Hope, and Janet are separated from Scott and Cassie, he finally gets to see her in her suit. And this is kind of relating back to her being in jail at the beginning. It's supposed to be Scott is supposed to come to terms that she's grown up now and accept the fact that she's no longer a little kid and let the bird out of the nest kind of thing. This is played all well and good, but really, I feel like if we had more time with Cassie and Scott, it would have just had a more emotional impact behind everything. I feel like they only get 3 scenes together, and it's not enough for me to see what's actually going on, get attached to the conflict that Scott is feeling on the inside. So after joking around with the locals for a little bit, Scott and Cassie get captured by Kang, and then we kind of learn more about his motives, and Bill Murray shows up to make Janet spill all the beans because he starts talking about his penis and sex and nature and stuff of that. However, it's okay because we have a very healthy family, so Hope and Hank don't really get mad at her when she talks about Kang's backstory and how he is a conqueror and how she helped them and how she also had sex with Bill Murray. It all ends up being okay. There was no reason for her to worry. She just wanted to forget about it, and her stalling was to create more hype. But this is when we get to meet Kang the Conqueror, and really he steals the show. I love Jonathan Majors' performance with the 2 different iterations of Kang the Conqueror that we've seen. He brings a lot of personality and changes the atmosphere every time he's on scene with any of these other characters, and he's always serious. It makes for more consistency and a better understanding of his motives. Now, having MODOK as the slapstick joke character was really smart because this allowed Kang to stay as consistent as he was and saved us from having another Ultron, if you might say.
Dark is not. I'm sorry. I'm sure that's gonna be okay. I'm sorry.
We learned through Janet that Kang was so bad that the other Kangs had to exile him away, and with Janet's help, he almost gets out, but at last second, she sees him for his true nature and betrays him. She then later starts rebellions to try to stop him, but eventually just ends up leaving with Hank in the second film, and this is why she feels so guilty, because she left all these people behind to stay suppressed by Kang the Conqueror. And this time around, Kang has a new ally, Scott. He's going to do the most villainous thing of all and hold Cassie as hostage and use his oversized battery as ransom in order to give Cassie back to Scott. Scott, all he has to do is get down, shrink the battery that Kang wants, and give it back to him. Simple enough. However, Kang's presence demands respect, and it is so enticing to watch. Whenever he ends up running into these other characters, these comedic characters that have done a great job at making the first two acts a comedy, it completely switches into a very more serious tone movie that ends up having some stakes to it and makes the third act a lot more enjoyable than the first two acts. And I think this is where the audience and critics really split off, because the critics up until now have experienced a movie where there's no real inner turmoil between our protagonists or any of the supporting cast. Whenever we meet the natives, they're there just to give exposition and lore, but don't really serve any other purpose besides that. There's also Janet, who probably had the most opportunity for character growth, but that gets taken away with Cassie kind of rallying the natives together to revolt against Kang. We don't really care what happens to any of the natives when it comes to the large action sequence that happens in the third act, because we haven't been given the proper amount of time or reason to really care. Everything's been staying surface value with no deeper meaning behind it. However, for the audience, when Scott meets his other universal selves and decision making, and they fight, but they all come together whenever Cassie needs help, just like in the first film, it becomes just very known that universally all Scotts will help his daughter and save his daughter no matter the situation, and they can all agree on that. Same with Hope coming in and saving Scott, and seeing all of her decisions combining with each other and him is very symbolic of their love for one another, and that as well is universal between both Hope and Scott. When Kang gets his battery, instead of honoring his word, he still keeps Cassie as hostage because he learned from Janet that he shouldn't trust anyone and that he needs to look out for himself. And Hank brings in an army of giant ants to make the third act's action sequence even more epic than it could have already been. These are moments that create relatable factors for the audience, as well as just kick-ass moments. Overall, I like the film. I would only recommend it if you're already into Marvel Cinematic Universe and things like that. I do think that setting up Kang in this film hurt it more than it actually helped it. However, it did create a lot of hype and made me excited to see what's gonna happen next in the MCU. So I'd probably give it like a 6 out of 10. Until next time, play nice.